Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure you were deliberately quiet.
Good morning, everyone. The first presentation is the book, The Innovation Stack, and it is subtitled Building an Unbeatable Business, One Crazy Idea at a Time. And this book is really a fun read and a significant book. And Jim McKelvey is the co-founder of Square, which is the credit card reading system that comes in a little cute square. And he co-founded that with a former intern who then he promoted to manager, and then they co-founded the company. And that former intern is Jack Dorsey, who is now the CEO of Square and Twitter. So Jim McKelvey has quite a background. And if you will turn in your handout to page 8, all the way to page 8, we'll go back to page 2 in a bit, but we're at page 8. And I want to start because he is so interesting on the right. Jim McKelvey, when he was in college, he wrote a college textbook on computer programming because students were being forced to purchase an outdated, poorly written, overpriced book so the chairman could make a few bucks off us. And so consequently, he wrote a textbook, and he ended up not going into that field, and he really didn't know much about it, but he felt like he could do a better job writing a textbook. And then he had a job and still practices. He had a job as a glass blower. And so that was very interesting to read about the delicacy and the intricacies of glass blowing. He started a company, hired the summer intern who solved problems and became a manager at age 16 of people older than he. And that summer intern was Jack Dorsey. So he founded Square with Jack Dorsey. He has other endeavors, and he is also now the founder of, and I hope you see this on your handout and look at it carefully. It's a bold initiative. He's the founder of launchcode.org. And what it is a way to train inner city teenagers on how to write code. And then, in addition to training them how to write code, he's helping them find jobs. So it's a very significant effort. Now, there are lots of stories in the book. When he was young, but old enough to drive, whenever he was at an event with a speaker, especially with a CEO, he would offer to take the CEO to the airport. He would hang around, say, I'm willing to take you to the airport. And practically all of the CEOs took him up on it. So he would pick the brain of the CEO. He said this was before the day of Uber. He would pick the brain on the way to the airport. And he had a really interesting observation. He said, I learned a lot about how to build a business, but I learned nothing about how to be an entrepreneur. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. But he said, CEOs do not know how to be entrepreneurs. They know how to build a business. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And then a very important moment for him is he had a fellow friend glassblower named Bob who could not blow glass and sell it because he had no way to get credit card payments. And that was kind of one of the pieces of the puzzle that created Square. But the other piece was his own experience. He had a piece of glass that he had created, and a woman wanted to buy it, and she pulled out of her purse an American Express card, and he said, do you have a different card? And she said, no, I don't. And so she walked out, and he lost the sale. Those two elements helped create the idea of Square. So that's the idea. Here is the overarching metaphor in the book. He says, imagine a city within the walls. And so you've got a city within the walls and all of the things that happen within the walls of a city. Do you want to build your company inside the city walls or outside the city walls? The rules are different. There are no rules outside the city walls. Now we're beginning to get to his idea of what an entrepreneur is. He said a business person copies business principles, but an entrepreneur is a person who creates something totally new. I had a lot of thought about whether or not I should present this book, because one of the things I've learned is that people who call themselves entrepreneurs, people that we describe as entrepreneurs, are not actually entrepreneurs. They are business people who've done a good job building a new business, but it is not a unique business. It is, in essence, copying a business, a new restaurant, a new technology company, but doing what other restaurants or technology companies do. So that's the idea. And so there is a difference between a business person and an entrepreneur. Now, if you'll take your pen, put a box around this next section, the other big find. This is significant. The other big find. You need a perfect problem to solve. That is the phrase he uses throughout the book. You need a perfect problem to solve. It is a problem that has never been solved. Otherwise, it's done. Now you're copying a business. And so it is a perfect problem that has never been solved. And he says it's a problem that will genuinely help the unserved, unhelped people. Square, the credit card company, Square was really invented for the lowest level of businesses who were not big enough to use the big credit card services. And he had has a remarkable graphic in the book that shows how the great big companies actually pay lower for credit cards. And so the credit card companies make more money on the middle companies. And no credit card company was making money on the lowest companies. And so it's a problem that genuinely helps the unserved and unhelped people. It is the problem that only you can solve. Only you can solve it. That's the perfect problem. And it is the problem that, because it has never been solved, really circle this, you cannot copy a solution. There's not a company out there that has done what you're trying to do. It is a new company, a new idea, a unique idea. It is a problem that's never been solved. And so you have to do something in a brand new way. So at the bottom of page 8, an existing business versus a true entrepreneurial business. If you can copy an existing business, then you are not an entrepreneur. Most people who start a business in a market they don't understand just copy what works. Turn to the top of page 9. This is a quote from the book. I will now tell you the universal formula for success in any existing industry. Copy what everyone else does. You want to build an online store for dog food or home brewery supplies? Want to develop a subscription service for accounting software or cheese? Want to mail people clothing in a box every month? There is a formula for each of these businesses. The critical factor is there an existing formula? Now, with this situation, you have to find a way to come up with something brand new, All right, but outside the walls, copying someone else isn't an option because no one has been there before. Since no one has been there before, you are doing something new. The second benefit of life outside the wall was that we were free to try anything we wanted to. Whatever was possible was permissible. You have more freedom when you're doing something that has never been done, and so you're not copying. Now, some of you know about the concept of the long tail. Chris Anderson, not Chris Anderson of TED, but Chris Anderson, who started, I think it was Fast Company or Wired. I apologize, I didn't write that down. But Chris Anderson had a book called The Long Tail. I presented it years ago, and it started out as an article that was very significant. And he says the strategy is you can make money off of the long tail. And the illustration that Chris Anderson used years ago was that, and you got to go back a ways for this, do you remember Blockbuster Video? Well, Blockbuster Video, only in 1 or 2 neighborhoods in the country would have enough customers to rent Bollywood movies. And so they would not stock them at the average Blockbuster Video. Whereas Netflix began to send out DVDs of Bollywood musicals. That's the long tail. There are enough customers if you can find a way to get them to those few customers. And so in this book, the author McKelvey says, is this simply brilliantly the long tail? That's his question. And I think there is a sense in which it is, and you'll see what I mean in a few minutes. Now, here are the big stories. The first one is Square. It was the lower end of the user, and among the things they did at Square is they have no live human voice customer service. And they wanted a little gizmo that looks cool and fun. If you've seen the little square that you plug into the iPhone or the iPad, it looks cool and fun. Here are some principles. You make it easy, but something that people have to learn. Circle that. It's a profound insight. It is easy once people learn how to do it. And so the little square was actually hard to learn how to run the credit card through it. It jiggled a little. And so people got good at it, and they were proud of getting good at it. Do any of you remember the very first time you flew on Southwest Airlines? You were confused. You did not have an assigned seat. You had to stand in line and board with your group. You literally had to learn to fly on Southwest Airlines. That's a really interesting insight. He mentions, and I'll tell you about it in a minute, IKEA. Before IKEA, you bought furniture, it arrived at your house, and it was ready to put in the room. Now you have to learn to put your furniture together. And so it is easy, but you have to learn how to do it, and then you're kind of proud of yourself for learning how to do it. So that's really an interesting idea. And then he says you've got to choose a good name. And they chose Square, and it means to square up, means to settle a debt or make something fair. And he says you need a constant process of invention and iteration. Try something new, see the result, try something new again. Now, he says that there is an innovation stack, that you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. And each time when you do one, you realize I have to learn a new one. And so you have to keep building that innovation stack. Here is Square's innovation stack. I have it listed on page 9. Simplicity. It was just understood our product must be fair and simple. You can set it up quickly. Free sign up. Free is a magic word. Free is a magic price. You never have to explain free. Free is a magic price, and it is even more magical if you get a cool piece of hardware for it. So he sent you the hardware. No contracts, no live support, beautiful hardware, fast settlement. you get a charge on Square, you get the money much more quickly than credit card companies used to do. They're probably speeding up because of it. Low price. They have a low set fee. And I will tell you from using Square at First Friday Book Synopsis that Visa, MasterCard, and American Express are all the same fee. So that took away part of the old American Express conversation. No advertising, online setup, new fraud modeling. That's important. Balance sheet accountability, audacity, and luck. People don't give luck enough credit. Luck never feels like luck if you were working hard when you happen to get lucky. Let me just mention something about this morning. A few months before the turn of the year, the CEO of Salesforce led a move to take a bunch of money, quite a few hundreds of millions, if I remember correctly, to buy into a company that he thought had a future. If you're not aware, Salesforce bought Zoom, stock in Zoom. They didn't buy the company. They put in a major piece of investment. To put it mildly, that investment has paid off. That's what you call return on luck. Jim Collins calls it that. And so luck plays a major role. Now, some of the other stories in the book, and first a thought about finding mentors. When Jim McKelvey gave those rides to those CEOs, they never had good advice on how to do something brand new. Their advice was always copy. Now, they didn't use that word, but that's what they were proposing. And he says, you've got to find mentors who did something brand new. And so you may have to find a dead mentor, someone who lived before. And he said, I have found some dead, some living. He decided to really study Christopher Columbus. And there's a line about Christopher Columbus that says, Queen Isabella of Castile hemmed and hawed for 6 years. Christopher Columbus basically said, give me money. I'm going to make a journey. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know what I'm going to find. I don't know where I'm going to find it or when I'm going to find it. Give me money. And he kept pushing and pushing, and she did. He was doing something new. He has a great section on Herb Kelleher. And among the things he noticed about Herb Kelleher was that Herb Kelleher was not taking passengers from other airlines. He was taking passengers from Greyhound bus lines. He said, there are people who want to fly who cannot afford to fly. That is true entrepreneurial build outside the city gates. And then he tells an amazing story about A.P. Giannani, who started a bank called the Bank of Italy. It later became a very sedate Bank of America. But in the beginning days, look at the quote on page 9, I'm going to open a bank for people who don't use banks. Giacomo, tell me how to do it. And AP named it the Bank of Italy. And he's got a great section about that, how people who had never been using a bank went into the Bank of Italy, started small savings accounts, very small, started putting their money there. And there are some pretty adventurous stories about this guy. One of them during the Great Fire in San Francisco, I think I've got that right in my memory, he took the gold out of his fledgling bank, hid it under vegetables, and took it out to a farm so that no one would loot the gold, and it saved his bank. So very interesting. And then IKEA, IKEA wasn't allowed to put their furniture on display in the furniture gatherings. They were opposed by every furniture maker. They figured out that they had to let people put together their own furniture, and they were genuinely entrepreneurial. two great risks. Every new enterprise battles for survival, but entrepreneurial companies face additional threats. And here are the two, circle these: starvation and predation. So Amazon tried to put Square out of business. They came up with their own little device. They came up with actually a lower price, but something about it didn't work, and Amazon finally gave up. And he said, we survived Amazon. And he said, there will be war. Remember the competitors of Southwest and IKEA and Square. They did everything they possibly could to stop them. Keep in mind that most of these customers were not stolen from the attacking competitor. Southwest took more traffic away from the bus lines than the airlines, but the airlines opposed them every step of the way. And remember, you likely will have to teach your customers how to use your product or service. It is even good that you have to do so. And so Southwest in their boarding practices, Square in their swiper, IKEA taught their customers how to put their furniture together. Clipboard, I'm reading from the bottom of page 9, clipboard toting psychologists actually refer to a phenomenon known as the IKEA effect. Simply put, the frustrating act of assembling your own furniture causes you to fall in love with the final product. You're proud of yourself. Now, he also says you've got to work really well with others. Now, I've sort of done this in not the usual order I do. Let's go back to page 2, and I'm going to just read a few excerpts, and then we'll wrap this one up. On page 2, why is this book worth our time? This book is a quick tutorial about how to succeed in business by copying other businesses. Number 2, but this book is a book that describes entrepreneurial success as genuinely rare and success that cannot be achieved by copying others. Number 3, this book describes the process of entrepreneurial success, the creation of an innovation stack and a stubborn focus on doing what has not been done. So on the left, what is the point? Instead of copying a business, start a truly new one by tackling a problem that can be solved but has not been solved, and nobody knows what to do about it. All right, I'm just going to read a couple of the highlights on page 3, number 17. The results were amazingly different. The large unit was interesting. They had a Square large swiper, but the tiny unit was breathtaking. People were mesmerized by the tiny unit, but only when it had the stage to itself. It was a moment of full attention, a moment of wow. Circle wow and ask, what do you do that is wow? Turn to page 4, number 32. We copied everything we could. We did the absolute minimum amount of invention that we could do to survive. And in the process of doing that, ended up with over a dozen things that nobody had ever done. So copy what you can, but if copying does everything you need, you are not tackling the perfect problem. We didn't choose invention, but we chose a problem where invention was the only solution. And now, if you'll turn all the way to page 7, this will be the last excerpt I read. Number 83, you cannot view the elements of an innovation stack individually. The innovation evolves as a whole. This goes with this, goes with this, goes with this. And you've got to put it all together. All right, turn to the back, page 10, for the lessons and takeaways. Number 1, you have to decide. Do you want to help build or grow a business by copying others? There's nothing wrong with that. Or do you want to try something truly new? Do you want to be a business person or an entrepreneur? It is okay to be a business person. By copying and tweaking, you'll make things better if you're good at it. But to do something truly new, that's unique. Number two, do you have a mentor who can help you learn what you need to learn, whether they are living or not living? Number three, have you learned to see the truly missed opportunity frequently at the bottom of the spectrum? Number four, are you willing to do the work that needs to be done, to learn how to do the work that needs to be done? Number five, have you learned to study the stories of success? Meaning, have you learned how to learn the lessons of the stories of success? And have you learned the lessons of the stories of failure? You don't read the stories of success to copy, but to learn how they tackled. And number six, have you learned to search for your perfect problem to tackle? Now, let me pause at the end of this presentation and make two observations. There are people who come to the First Friday Book Synopsis who have had to learn how to use the handouts. They have to learn how to circle and mark them up, how to follow along. There is no other event I go to that is handout intensive like ours. And I think I've had people tell me, it helps me. I go back over the handouts. I read the quotes you don't read. I really learn the content of the book. So I'm teaching you how to do First Friday Book Synopsis. A second observation is this is something that you can't get anywhere else. Nowhere else that I know of can you go to a live event and get significant elements of content from two books. So I read this book and felt fulfilled and proud of what we've done. Now, I haven't figured out how to scale it and make a lot of money. But the book is The Innovation Stack, Building an Unbeatable Business, One Crazy Idea at a Time. I'm going to take a 40-second break. You chat with each other on the chat, and we'll begin the second presentation in 40 seconds. Okay, if everyone will now take the handout to the catalyst, subtitled How to Change Anyone's Mind. My academic training is in rhetoric, communication, rhetoric, and public address. The first thing you learn in rhetoric is the teachings of Aristotle. And Aristotle said that rhetoric is the art of finding the available means of persuasion. And he said there are three primary means of persuasion: logos, the logical appeal; ethos, the ethical appeal, the credibility and the trustworthiness and the competence of the presenter, speaker, writer; and pathos, the emotional appeal. This is the appeal to the emotions of the audience, and it is the appeal from the emotion of the presenter or writer. A later person, we don't know exactly who, Carl Crayer, I think, used to argue that it was Cicero, but a later person came up with a fourth element of persuasion: mythos, the narrative appeal, weaving the stories. There is nothing in this book that contradicts that. I would say that it elaborates on them. Although I am certainly beginning to understand that logic, facts, do not always persuade. Turn to page 2. And on the bottom left of page 2, What is the point? Use all the strategies you can, but understand this. All persuasion is self-persuasion. Your job is to be the catalyst to help enable self-change. And so in this book, Jonah Berger, he's a good writer. I did an earlier book by him called Contagious, I think it was, on how to make sure your product or service is contagious. Jonah Berger is very clear that people make the decision to change themselves. They make the decision to change themselves. All persuasion is self-persuasion. You can't force someone to change, but you can be a catalyst for them to change. And this book elaborates on how to go about doing that. At the top of the page, why is this book worth our time? Number one, this book explains why persuasion is so very difficult. Number two, this book explains why so many messages, attempted messages of persuasion, have practically no chance of working. It's a really strong point. And number three, this book provides some strategies that make persuasion possible while demonstrating that all persuasion is self-persuasion. Now, he has plenty of examples in the book from parents who say to their children, do this, and the children don't, to adults who know they should eat better, exercise more, manage their time better. They are told to do it, and they don't do it. And there is a great example of a fortune spent on some Buick television commercials that did not work, and some anti-smoking efforts that did not work. And it really is a study of this is persuasion that didn't work. This is persuasion that didn't work. Here are a few that did work. And it's really valuable in that sense. All right, I'm going to read a few of the excerpts before we get to the second half of the handout. On page 2, number 1, everyone has something they want to change, but change is hard. This is a business book and a life book, because every attempt at sales and marketing and every attempt at getting your team to do what you want, all of those are attempts at change. And so this really fits into a business setting. All right, turn to page 3. Look at quote number 12. Instructing jurors to disregard inadmissible testimony can encourage them to weigh it more heavily. A judge says, disregard that, they're going to pay attention to it. Alcohol prevention messages, don't drink so much alcohol, can lead college students to drink even more. And let me remind you that in the latest book by Malcolm Gladwell, we learned that the binge drinker of today's college campus is drinking many more drinks than the binge drinker from the 1950s and the 1960s. Really interesting. Number 13, people have a need. Circle this, put a star beside this. People have a need for freedom and autonomy. I want to make my own decisions. I get to make my own decisions. I'm free to make my own decisions. Consequently, people are loath to give up agency. They are not letting other people tell them what to do. So I don't know if you remember this. There was a few months ago something called the Tide Pod Challenge. The Tide Pod is the soap that comes in a pod that you wash clothing with. Number 17. So just like the Tide Pod Challenge, to reestablish a sense of autonomy, people often react against persuasion. People were told not to eat the Tide Pod, and what did they do? They ate it. They do the opposite of whatever is being requested. All right, let's turn to page 4. We'll just read a few more of these. Number 35, To truly get rid of weeds or to truly change minds, you must find the root. You've got to get down to the root. Why do they feel this way? Why do they do this? You've got to help them find the root. Number 38, when's the last time you changed your mind because someone told you to? And my guess is you may not have. All right, turn to page 5. Number 48. Whenever people think about changing, they compare things to their current state, the status quo. And if the potential gains barely outweigh the potential losses, they don't budge. To get people to change, the advantages have to be at least twice as good as the disadvantages. In other words, people feel like, I like what I've got, I know how to do it, it's comfortable, it's easy. If I have to learn something new, do something new, change, I don't want to do it unless it is a lot better. The bottom of page 5, if we just share more evidence, list more reasons, or put together the right deck, people will switch. No, but just as often this blows up in our faces. Rather than shifting perspectives, people dig in their heels like I do and like you do. And so that is a common practice. Let me read just maybe one or two more on page 7. Page 7. I felt especially strongly about this because I'm having a problem on Zoom with my presentations in terms of the experience. Number 88. When presenters don't get any response or feedback from their audience, body language, you can see their eyes. They not only enjoy it less, they do a worse job overall. I hope I'm doing an okay job, but I prefer a live situation. We can't have it right now. All right, now let's turn to page 8, and we're going to get to the heart of the book. Over on the left, special substances take a different approach. Rather than pushing, they lower the barriers to change. And these substances are called catalysts. This is from the chemist perspective. But their underlying approach is equally powerful in the social world because there is a better way to generate change. It's not about pushing harder. Instead, it's about being a catalyst, changing minds by removing roadblocks and lowering the barriers that keep people from taking action. This book is about finding the parking brakes. It has a simple goal to reframe how we approach a universal problem. You identify the key barriers preventing change, and then you try to mitigate them. All right, on the right, I'm just going to briefly mention these great stories in the book. It starts with an FBI hostage negotiator who begins every conversation with the person he's trying to negotiate with this phrase, "Hi, I'm Greg with the FBI. Are you okay?" Calls them by name and says, "Are you okay?" He does not start with the demand. He starts with building a connection, trust, interconnectedness. "I'm Greg with the FBI. Are you okay?" Now, there's a remarkable story out of Thailand. They had tried everything that every non-smoking campaign does. It will hurt your health. It will kill you. All sorts of statements about the dangers of smoking. But here's what they did. They would send 10-year-old children in public out to somebody who is smoking, and the 10-year-old would pull out a cigarette and put it in the mouth and say, "Can I have a light? Do you have a light?" And the adults would be appalled at the idea that a 10-year-old would be smoking. And the adult who was smoking would say to the 10-year-old, no, you don't want to start this. This is bad for you. You should not do this. It will harm your health. It will kill you. And so the child, these were all trained, walked away after handing the smoker a little piece of paper that said, if you would like help stopping to smoking, call this number. And so they began to get calls. There were more calls and more people stopping smoking from that because the person who said, can I have a light, was a 10-year-old. It's a really fascinating concept. There is a test preparation company for the GMAT. This is a graduate test. And the persons leading the sessions would say, this is how many hours you have to study in order to bring your math score up to this level. And when you do this, you will pass this test at a high enough rank that you can get into the better colleges. It never worked. And so they changed their approach. They said, how many people get into these schools? What do you think their average GMAT score is? Research, Google this, find it out. How many hours do they spend studying for the test? And the participants discovered on their own what they needed to do, and that raised their scores. There's a story in here about a Ku Klux Klan leader who changed his mind with a little help from a Jewish rabbi catalyst. Great story. The author really wanted to keep his old familiar iPhone because he knew it so well, and he resisted getting the new one until he finally had to. There was a company that was making everybody use a software update. And there were a number of people who just weren't doing it. They were using the old one. And finally, the company said, if you don't use it, then you will get no more IT support. And if your computer breaks, you will pay for the breaking. And that's when they changed. And that's a concept called burn the boats. Interesting. In Brexit, he has a section where he says, Brexit first called itself, let's take control. And that wasn't working. And they switched to, let's take back control. That's the reclaiming of what was lost. Reaching across the aisle doesn't work very often. He tells a great story about a farmer's son named Everett Rogers, whose dad was among the last farmers to switch to hybrid corn, even though the fellow farmers had better corn crops, more profits. His dad was using what was the old way. And so Everett Rogers went off to college. He discovered this as a teenager, went off to college, went to graduate school, and wrote a famous book called Diffusion of Innovations. And in that book, he describes how people don't even want to change to a better crop because they want to keep what's familiar. He talks about Dropbox and the use of freemium, where you give part of it away free. He talked about the World War II meat crisis, and he couldn't get housewives, they were the ones cooking, to switch to other kinds of meat, brains and less desirable parts, and they had to do it in stages, meatless Mondays. And he talks a great story about an addict, a sad story, but a great story about an addict who went through an intervention, and it was the catalyst that helped him change. All right, put a box around this next section. Get this. This is the whole ball game. All persuasion is self-persuasion. To lower the barrier, catalysts encourage people to persuade themselves. The persuader is simply a catalyst for self-persuasion. Pushing harder does not work. You've got to find something else than pushing harder. Now, the enemies of persuasion is the power of inertia. People don't want to get up off their chair. People don't want to change what they're doing. And here are the 5 principles. It's at the bottom of page 8. Reactance, endowment, distance, uncertainty, and corroborating evidence. Those are the 5 key roadblocks that inhibit or stop change. Turn to page 9. These 5 ways to be a catalyst can be organized into an acronym. Catalyst: reduce resistance, ease endowment, shrink distance, alleviate uncertainty, and find corroborating evidence. Taken together, they form the acronym REDUCE, which is exactly what great catalysts do. They reduce roadblocks, they change minds, and they incite action by reducing barriers to change. Let me comment. I think that this book is worth reading carefully if you are in sales, because this will give you strategies to really tackle the objections. And so it's a valuable book. If you read my handout carefully, you'll get enough to put into practice. The first principle is reactance. When pushed, people push back. And so if you tell somebody to do something, it has the opposite effect. It makes them more likely to do it. To reduce reactance, catalysts allow for agency. 4 key ways they do it are: provide a menu. Everybody circle the phrase, provide a menu. Number 1, ask, don't tell. Ask, what do you think? How many hours do you think students who make it into Harvard spend getting ready for the GMAT? Highlight a gap and start with understanding. So I want to talk about provide a menu a minute. The idea of providing a menu is, if you have kids who won't eat their dinner, if you say, eat your dinner, they won't do it. But if you say, would you like to eat your macaroni and cheese or your peas first? You give them a choice, you provide a menu. They say, well, I guess the macaroni and cheese first, and then they start eating. And I read this, and I thought of an old church story. There was an evangelist, a Southern evangelist in the 60s, 50s. His name was W.A. Bradfield. He would go city to city doing revivals or gospel meetings. And during the day, he would visit people that had been to church but had never joined. In that denomination, they needed to be baptized. So there's a story, a legendary story told about W.A. Bradfield. He goes to visit a married couple. She's a member. She's been baptized. He hasn't been. And Bradfield said this: I understand you haven't been baptized. Would you like to be baptized now? We can go to the church building right now, or do it tonight at the gospel meeting. And the guy said, I don't know. He said, well, maybe you don't understand the question. Would you like for me to baptize you, or the local preacher here to baptize you? And he said, well, I guess the local preacher. He said, great. You want to do it now or tonight? And he said, I guess I'll do it tonight. He gave him a menu. It's a legendary story in that denomination, but it reminds you that if you say, here are the options, somebody might do it. The second principle is endowment. How do you ease endowment? You resurface the cost of inaction. Say, if you don't do this, this is what it's going to cost you, and you burn the bridges. Principle 3 is distance. To put it in simple terms, you cannot get a right-wing Republican and a left-wing socialist, either one of them, to switch sides. When the distance is great, all you can do is find a little bit of movement. But somebody here can get somebody here to move a little bit. So you have to examine how far the distance is. Number 4 is uncertainty. You have to reduce uncertainty. There's a story in the book about a company that was called shoesite.com that figured out, if we provide free shipping with free return, then somebody might be willing to order more shoes from us. And that shoe company became Zappos. if you give free delivery and free shipping and free return, then people are more willing to give it a try. And so you've got to reduce the uncertainty. The question, how do you do it? Harness freemium, reduce upfront costs, drive discovery, and make it reversible. And then you need corroborating evidence. And there's a great story in that section about a camp done with teenagers, with Israelis and Palestinians, teenagers. And they had to help each other climb small mountains. And they had to eat together and cook together. And by the end of the process, they at least had built some bridges. And so you got to get people working together. There's a hint in there of the power of peer pressure. All right, turn to page 10, some lessons and takeaways. Number one, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to actually learn, put into practice all of these lessons. That's a personal comment because I don't like to change. I read books about change. I propose change. I recommend change. I can be set in my ways. I'm saying that to say you have that element also. We've got to become more open to change. Number two, people do not like to change much of anything. We have to recognize this reality. Number three, big asks, big changes are much more unlikely than small asks and small changes. We'll give you a free Zoom account. You can use it for free. You can have a 40-minute meeting with a small number of people. You give it a try. That's a small ask. And then you pay for the extra for bigger meetings and more participants. And so that's the idea. Number four, make your next step request easy, convenient, and tolerable. Free, trialability, returnability, refundability, reversibility really helps. Number five, get really good at asking questions and then listen to the responses. Learn to pause in order to listen. Number six, the most obvious lesson is this: persuading others requires a strategy for you to assume the catalyst role. You can't make them. You become a catalyst in order to make self-persuasion possible and more likely. And number seven, you and I could be wrong about something, whether it be in our behavior or in our stances. Where and about what do you need to persuade yourself to change? The Catalyst, How to Change Anyone's Mind by Jonah Berger. I hope you found this useful. And thank you for listening to the two Synopsis presentations. Hold on for just a second. I have just a few brief announcements. And after these announcements, we'll open up the microphones and you can visit with others as long as you want. I'm going to share the screen again. So let me get to that. All right, let's see here. So we have finished that. We give stuff away. And I'm going to be giving away the two books, The Innovation Stack and The Catalyst. When we have our live event, we of course call people up. So I will be picking from all of the people that I know attended in some way or another, and I'll be giving stuff away. We'll also give one free certificate to a future live in-person First Friday Book Synopsis. Some other events to know about: on the Urban Engagement Book Club, Books on Social Justice, I just did the book on Zoom for anti-Semitism. We do books on racism, poverty, homelessness. That will be at noon on the third Thursday of each month. If you're interested about that, let me know. On Wednesday, May 20 at 7:30 in the morning, Success North Dallas on Zoom will have as a speaker Daniel Moon. You might know the Sam Moon entity. This is the son of Sam Moon, and it's the evolution of an entrepreneurial family. Remember, if you're not on our email list for our future events, sign up at First Friday Book Synopsis, 15minutebusinessbooks.com, and sign up in that box. If you would like, this has been offered for free, but if you would like to contribute, I invite you to send $12 directly to Randy through PayPal, and my email address is on the handouts, and it's randymayu@sbcglobal.net. And next month, on June 5th, I'm confident it will be on Zoom again. I'm going to do the new book, Think Like a Rocket Scientist, written by a rocket scientist who became a graduate of law school and now is a professor, and it's about tackling big issues. And then I'm going to do a slightly older book by Ben Horowitz, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I chose these books, one of them because this is a hard time, and the other one because we need to think big. So those are the reasons for those two books. And we will now open up conversation at the end of the meeting. Let me get back to the other screen and I will unmute everybody. Thank you for coming today.
And for those of you who don't know, I went ahead and put the PayPal email address in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Randy.
Randy.
Fabulous.
Randy.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Randy.
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 Appreciate Great job.
Thank you.
Randy. Super. Excellent.
You will also find the contact information. You will also find the contact information for Success North Dallas in chat as well. But successnorthdallas.com, and please join us as our guest and register. Randy, thank you very, very much.
Randy is one.
Yes.
At the beginning, I told you about the books that I've been, the review that I've been listening to in Spanish. One of them was the one you have, the Hard Things. That's one of the first books that I came across. So I'll have the benefit of the Spanish.
Okay. Put that information in the chat, and if you're not all aware, there is a way to save the chat, so you can save the chat. Okay. Thanks, Juan.
Terrific job, Randy. No surprise.
Thanks, Jim.
Excellent as usual, Randy.
Thank you. Y'all can talk to each other, not just to me.
Fantastic, Randy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You should do this for a living.
I am actually doing a number of Zoom presentations for companies. I do one of these book presentations, and I do a long.
Randy, you're echoing right now.
If any of you want that done, contact.
Randy, do you have a phone open or a second mic open? Somebody does.
Yeah, somebody's echoing.
I don't know.
If you're not talking, go on mute.
Randy, great book choices again. Really enjoyed today.
Thanks, Rhoda.
Thank you.
Hey, Randy. Just wanted to say hi. Long time no see. I don't know if you remember, you taught at El Centro many years ago, but I'm one of your old students, so glad to reconnect with you here.
Who's talking?
This is Adriana.
Adriana, great. And it was great. Thank you for your nice email, and it's great to reconnect. So thanks for coming. Thanks for
Likewise.
Coming. This is Zip, Randy. Learned those techniques about 35 years ago from an old sales guy. Slowly ask questions to get them to agree with you. Yeah. Also on TED Talk, there's an FBI guy that tells a lot about the FBI negotiations. He's pretty interesting.
It really is interesting, yes.
That's how come when the FBI comes to your door, don't say anything.
Thank you, Randy. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care, folks.
Thank you, Randy.
Anybody on here?
Thank you,
not-
Randy.
California?
Great
Hi,
job.
Linda. Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, Randy, it's Lisa Sutton. I just want to tell you that you may miss our responses, but we also miss giving them to you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not the same, but it's still awesome.
It really is an adjustment to not have any kind of close interaction. I'm totally in favor of social distancing, but we've learned what we've lost through this. It's really pretty amazing. So
Hi, Randy. This is Gerald. I suffered that anomaly for about 5 years when UT asked me to go from the classroom to teach online because I had problems predominantly because I couldn't see responses and the students couldn't see their pupils dilate if I said something that was confusing.
yeah.
Or the eye rolling.
Have all of you seen the Israeli mother's rant about teaching her children at home?
No.
Google Israeli mother distance learning. It's 2 minutes and it is hilarious. I mean, it is absolutely hilarious. But it describes the difficulty that mothers and parents are having in a lot of ways in this. So it's very interesting. Hi, Debbie. You're muted, but I'm saying hi.
Hi, I heard. Hey, love seeing all of you.
Debbie.
Good to see you. Good to see everyone.
Yes.
Hey,
Real
Mike.
people without mask on.
Yes.
Yes.
I have to show off though. I bought a really cool mask this time. Finally, it finally came in on Zoom. I mean, kind of came in from Amazon. That's my mask now.
Well, that's cool.
Cool, Letitia.
That's cool.
Awesome.
I of course, now I look like a bandito, but that's fine.
I heard that if this goes on too long, that parents are going to find the cure before researchers do.
I'm sure that will. Might be true.
Very likely.
Is Bill Wallace still on?
I don't see him. Yeah, he is. There he is.
He is.
Yes, I'm still on.
You want to say anything about Daniel Moon?
Well, the fun part is a lot of people don't realize that the Moon family own the Renaissance Hotel at Legacy West. They're building the new Hilton at Stonebriar. They've owned the Coyote Ridge Golf Club and development and many, many other things. So it's totally an entrepreneurial family. Mama still gets credit for the buying, but it's an old-fashioned family where Sam Moon is still the leader. So the story of an entrepreneurial family, they're going to take it back to coming here, what they had to do, how they made the decisions and the choices to move forward, how they evaluated their risk. And then we were supposed to do this in May, but Sam, Daniel, and David are going to host us for a happy hour at their Coyote Ridge development. This will probably occur in July now or maybe June because of the COVID-19. And on June 1st, they are actually having their grand opening for the Hilton at Stonebriar Mall.
Okay.
So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, thank you very much, Randy.
No, thank you.
Our guests, all of you.
Oh, there's the man.
Randy, I'm going to go ahead and log off. Let's talk after.
Who's saying
That's
that?
Letitia. It's Letitia.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Let's talk after. Okay. I'm going to put something on your calendar.
Okay.
Okay.
Jim Jameson posted in the chat that DFW-OD Network on May 2nd is talking about psychological safety during forced remote work. DFWODnet.org. It's a great group of people.
Thank you.
Thanks, Randy, once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Signing off.
Thank you, Randy.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank
you, Randy.
Have a good day.
Bye, darlings. Miss
Another
you.
vitamin for your brain. That's Michael Egan.
Thanks.
As always. Randy, I'm liking having the digital version of the handouts as well, because I can store it on my iPad and hopefully travel with it again soon, but it's nice having it as well in a digital format.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll start doing that even when we return to physical gathering, so you can do that. The problem is I usually get them ready at the last minute. So, but this time I got them ready a few days before, so that was good.
It's worth the wait, and I like seeing the different colors as well.
Yeah, it's better in color. So,
Randy, a question. Have you had any input from the Park City Club on what their plans and thoughts are yet?
I have not. I've not called them, but I do know I don't want to answer when I don't know. So I have not had any input. I need to call them. So, but I am not optimistic that they're going to want to have a large gathering in a close quarters by June, first week of June. So that's my concern. So, and I'm not sure everybody's going to be comfortable with that yet.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Including me. So, well, let's sign off. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to end the meeting, and thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Randy.
Thanks, Randy.